Well, thank you for joining us this morning. I would like to introduce Associate Professor in Early Childhood Education and Care from the University of Sydney, Marianne Fenech. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's a pleasure.
I'd like to just start by asking you a few questions, if that's okay, and if you would like to jump in and just tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing. But firstly, I would like to ask the question because I understand that you've conducted some research on family engagement in education and care services and how families like to engage. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about your research, please?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So it's I actually have a social work background. I'm not an early childhood teacher, and I think as a social worker, I worked with families in low-income areas. So and it was interesting because I came into early childhood by doing a PhD on the regulations.
Wow.
Some of you will be thinking, oh my gosh, couldn't even be worse. But I loved it. And I just fell in love with early childhood education. But one of the things, I guess, that I brought from my previous social work career into early childhood was how important connections with families are. So it's I've got a real heart for it. So a few years ago with colleagues from Macquarie University, we did a national survey and we investigated why both current users of early childhood and prospective users, so families who were thinking about using early childhood, what was influencing their decision making.
Wow. So what did you find from that research?
Yeah, look, we found it was interesting. Both groups, both the current users and the prospective users, I guess no surprise, wanted, basically, first and foremost, they wanted to see their child happy and safe. That was unanimous across the board. And I think when we think about what do parents want from a service, there's two ways to think about it: what they want for themselves, but what they want for their child, and then I guess as a family as a whole. So from the child perspective, it was very much that safety, that they want to feel like when they walk away and leave their child at the door, that their child is going to be loved as they love their child, that their child's going to be safe. And then, of course, from that base, then came we actually know we want, particularly for the older children, the 3 to 5s, it came out that, we want children to learn, we want them to socialize with other children and understand, learn how to share, and we want them to be ready for school. So that's the more cognitive, social, physical development side of things came after that. And then, of course, for the family themselves, sorry, I've got a plane going over here.
That's okay.
I live in the inner west of Sydney, so it's a bit of a hazard.
No problem at all.
Yeah, but from the family perspective, of course, they're looking for a service that's going to fit in with their family, that's flexible enough to meet their needs, that meets the hours, that suits, and I think they want to feel that they are using a service that they connect with, so that with the educators and the family, there's consistency in values and beliefs.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where family daycare really comes into its own, with building those positive relationships and the smaller group environment. And we feel typically that that's what families want, is that they can walk away. So it's interesting and fantastic to see that the research supports what family daycare educators are doing.
Well, definitely, Chris. And more recently, I'm currently involved in a project. The project is being led by colleagues from the University of New South Wales, and also involves colleagues from Western Sydney and Griffith. But we're looking at engaging families on low incomes, and family daycare is a critical piece of that research. And we're finding it's so interesting. The families are telling us the flexibility, the connections is absolutely critical. So educators listening to this, you are doing an amazing job.
Thank you, and we feel the same. We feel very fortunate to, have the privilege of taking care of these children and providing that high quality education and care for the families.
Yeah.
So the second question that I'd like to ask you is, do you generally feel that engagement is undertaken well in family daycare in terms of
Yeah.
relationships?
Yeah, look, from what I've gleaned, I mean, the ASEQA data tells us that generally engaging with family in quality area 6 is the area of practice that educators across the board do best. Out of all of the 7 quality areas, that's the one educators are doing well. So a third of all services are exceeding and 2/3 are meeting. I think there's something unique though with family daycare, and what I've seen is, I mean, the starting point is that educators are letting families into their own home. And I think there's something about educators where there's a genuine sense of welcoming, hospitality, inclusiveness. So I think family daycare educators do that really, really well. And the families are telling us that they become a part of the educator's life, and the educator becomes part of their life. So, and that happens even when the child leaves the service. So that real connection, I think that's testament to how well educators in family daycare are engaging families. I think, Chris, though, we need to think, when we ask that question, we need to think about, what are we talking about when we use the word engaging families? What does it mean to engage? And the way we think about it in our research is that when you engage a family, it's building that initial connection and working relationship, but then it's also maintaining that relationship over time. It could be a few months, but it could be a few years. So I think, as with any relationship, you can get a bit sort of blasé and, just get into the routine of things. But I think it's really important to continually be thinking about, how well is this engagement going? What's going well and what could be better? And we know that work can be quite emotionally taxing. So, it's a lot of energy to be focused on families and to give of yourself. But and that's where I think the coordination and the support from the broader family day service is so critical.
Absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out. I think, the educators do work really hard at, creating that sense of belonging from the moment that families walk in, and that's where engagement starts. And hopefully it's, a long relationship building process. And we know of many educators that continue to engage with families well after they have finished care. So that's really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, Chris. We've heard families tell us, either they didn't want a centre-based service, or they tried a centre-based service and it didn't work. And then when they come to family daycare, that more personalised approach, I think, does enhance that belonging that you were talking about.
Absolutely. And Marianne, could you please share with us how you feel that families are looking to engage with their education and care services, particularly with family daycare? And you've touched on a couple of points already. And also, why is family engagement so important and critical in education and care services?
Okay, so I'll start with the second bit then.
Thank you.
Look, it's absolutely critical. Engaging with families is, I think, if you can't engage with a family, the way you care and educate their child is going to be limited. We know that we need to engage with families because it's quality area 6 and we need to tick that box. But that's not why we engage with families at the end of the day. If to know the child, you need to know the family, and you need to have that shared approach to that child's learning and development, because that's when the child's really going to thrive. So I think that partnership is going to be really important. I think also when educators engage and know the family, when they they know who does the child mix with when they're at home, what does the family like to do, what's important to them, where do they go on a weekend, all of those things can feed into not just supporting the child, but extending on their learning and development, and having, the EYLF talks about play-based learning, interest-based
Mhm.
learning. Well, the family can provide a critical resource for that work. And I think in a way that by having that approach and through that engagement, then there's greater continuity for the child between the home environment and the family daycare. So it comes back to that belonging that you talked about before, having that continuum rather than a real disconnect for the child is really, really critical. And we know that the child, the child's family is their first teacher. So we would be completely mad not to engage with families and not to seek their input, share decision making, and so on. And of course, sometimes families struggle with raising a child. It's hard work. Anyone in family daycare knows that it can be hard work. It's a joy, but it can be hard work, and sometimes families struggle. So I think engaging families is important, because it means that the educator can have a trusting relationship and be a support for the family, but also, if need be, that the educator can refer the family on to other families or other services, so that that family isn't struggling and isn't feeling like they're on your own. So I think for those reasons, that's why engaging families is so critical. So in terms of what families are looking for, I think I think the number one thing is we have to be careful about not having a formula. All families are different, and I think one of the critical things is, I guess, coming back to what we were saying at the very beginning, treat each family as an individual and think about what is it that you want from the service, and what do you want for your child. So having those two questions. And our research is really clear, Chris, telling us that when families want to engage, they want to feel like they're accepted. They don't want to feel judged. They don't want to feel like they're a problem. They want to be able to come and be welcomed and feel like they can breathe when they come to the service. So that's really critical. Another key finding that's coming out from the current research that I'm doing is that families really value having time and that personalized approach with the educator. And I think the time, from what our families are telling us, that can be far more limited in a long daycare service where there's more children there. But in a family daycare context, we've heard beautiful conversations from families telling us, not that they're there the whole day, but they're there for a meaningful conversation with the educator to say what's going on for them, what's going on with the child. So yes, conversations can just be, how was your day? Here's what the child did today, and so on. But I think when done well, it's a more extended conversation about how you're going, really how are you going? So that connection is really important. And I think the flexibility and having an individual approach. We know sometimes children with additional needs really value family daycare because educators are able to be more responsive, and the family and the child are not seen as a problem, and that's a real strength of family daycare. And the only other thing I think I mentioned before is that shared decision making. So a process of talking about, well, here's what I'm observing and what I'm thinking. What do you think? So it's working together as a team. It's really
absolutely important. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom and knowledge, and sharing the findings of your research. And I think that all of the points that you said, from the shared approach to the belonging and to valuing those relationships, I think family daycare educators do that really well, in that they do respect that families are the children's first teachers. And I think they are in a better position, because of the smaller group environment, to be able to base those relationships on meaningful engagement with their families, but also, they do become a support network to the families.
Absolutely.
So, children that are coming from, different backgrounds, diversity, different cultural backgrounds, and also, the additional needs. I think, that places family daycare educators in a really good position, to be able to start those relationships, and also to get to know the family and have the family daycare environment just be an extension of their home environment, which is so
Exactly.
important.
Absolutely, it is. So there's some I don't know whether you wanted to ask me another question, Chris. Yeah.
Just one more, but
Yeah, great. Because I was going to say there's a few more things that I haven't said yet, but I'll wait till you. I think it might come in the next question. So
Absolutely, thank you. Well, just finally, the only question that I would like to add, and then we will tap into your knowledge and expertise, but are there any additional ideas on how family daycare educators could engage with families to meet particular family needs? You did touch on a few of them just in the last question, but if there's anything else that you'd like to add, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, just a few things, I guess general approaches rather than, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I think
Absolutely.
all things that I was thinking about that's come out of our research. And I've also published a book, Professional Communication for Early Childhood Educators, with Jennifer.
Fantastic.
And I know Jennifer's done some work with family daycare educators.
Okay.
And in that book, we talk about what engaging with families means, and there are 4 key things that we talk about. I've already mentioned, taking an individual approach, and I think I would just encourage educators, no matter how experienced an educator you are, always be curious about the family, and even and the child. Even
I love that.
Yeah, just be curious, even if they've been with you for 2 years. Still be curious, because we know children are changing and developing all the time, and families they don't stay static. They change all the time too. So don't lose that curiosity. I think that's really important. This is a basic point, that communication is key. So when I talk about communication, I'm not just, I guess, to reflect on as an educator, not just the words you use with families, but almost everything around that, because we know that the non-verbal communication is about 85% of a communication exchange. So, when you're trying to engage families, how are you doing that? In the way you speak, in the way the environment's set up, in your physical presence, in your tone of voice. So just, recheck all of those things. And we talk a lot about listening. And I think educators are in a really privileged position where sometimes they're the only person that a family feels comfortable disclosing how things really are.
Absolutely.
And that's a real responsibility. So to be able to really listen, I think, to focus, to show families you're really interested in them, to encourage them to tell their story, ask questions, tell me more, and to reflect back, what you've heard. I think those 3 aspects of listening are really, really critical. And then the final thing I would say, Chris, is a colleague, Mark Spencer, talks about the 3 pillars of engagement. So if we think about engagement as like a house, and it needs strong foundations. There are 3 pillars, or 3 strong foundations, that are really key. The first one is safety, that sense of emotional safety for the family. So creating an environment where families feel comfortable coming to your home, no matter what they look like or how they speak. They're not going to be judged. That you value them and what they have to say. So that safety is the first foundation. Availability, and I think educators do this extremely well. You make time for them. You communicate and talk to them and listen to them, and it's not rushed. I think that's really critical. So that availability. And then the final pillar or foundation is relevance. So when you're talking to a family, this seems like pretty basic, but rather than going off on a tangent and talking about the EYLF, which I don't know that educators can do necessarily, but keep it about them and their child, keep it meaningful, keep it relevant to them. So I think those sort of little tools, I think are worth always reflecting on in terms of, an educator's practice with families.
100%. There's so much to unpack there that I really want to dive into, and I'm trying to remember all of it. But I really love, and I want to go back to being curious. It doesn't matter how long you have engaged with a family or a child. At the end of the day, we really need to be curious all the time and never stop learning or wanting to learn about the family. So I really loved that point, and also the 3 pillars of engagement. I think they are fantastic tools, and as you said, they might seem basic in their approach, but they work. And I think, the 3 pillars are things that educators do really well day in, day out. And I think we need to stop and celebrate those moments with families and how we engage with families. Because, our jobs are busy, lives are busy, but I think we really need to stop and celebrate success.
Absolutely, Chris. I completely agree. And I've done a lot of my research in centre-based services, and over the last year and a half, I've done work with family daycare, and I have just been blown away by educators, not just commitment, but their capacity to connect with families and engage them in a way that I think is critical to support that, the children's learning and development. So it's just been a pleasure for me to see.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. It's really nice to get the feedback, and I know that I probably speak on behalf of many educators to feel validated within the sector, that we are being considered when, engagement topics come up, definitely. And again, celebrating those successes. They're things that educators do without even, questioning it or thinking about what they're doing, but they do it so effortlessly. But I think it's important to stop and remember how important our job is. And as you said earlier in this session, that we are privileged as educators to be able to welcome these families into our homes every single day and engage with them and get to know them and, watch these children grow and develop.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us before we finish this
think
interview?
I've covered everything, actually, Chris. And I think you've capped it off. You've summarised it beautifully as well. So I think engaging with families, I think when done well, it looks like a hidden skill. It looks like it is effortless, and you don't actually need any skills to do it, but you actually do. And it's engaging families, I think I said before, it's quite emotional work, and it can be draining at times. But I think there's a level of the more expert you are, the more effortless and unskilled it seems, but it's not. And I think educators are highly skilled. Yeah,
absolutely. Are there any challenges that you think that educators would face? We've talked a lot about the positives and the privileges of engaging with families, but what has your research found with some of the challenges that educators face with engaging with families?
I think working in isolation can sometimes be a challenge for educators, and I think sometimes there can be a danger of absorbing and taking on the issues that a particular family has. And so I think I would encourage all educators to contact, your coordinator and have contact with your local family daycare service, because when you work in isolation and when you engage in families and it's challenging and it's draining and you keep taking that on, that's not going to be good for your own well-being in the long run. So I think that working in isolation is a challenge. I think sometimes educators don't always know what to do, and they feel like they need to have all the answers. And I think this is where it's important when you're working with a family to think you're not the one-stop shop for a family. You can be the starting point, and you can be the connector, as I said before, with other families or with other services. So I think it's important to think, just because you have your own business, it doesn't mean you have to work in isolation. And in fact, I think you shouldn't work in isolation.
Correct.
You should always be using your family daycare as a resource and as a support for yourself. Because I think too, sometimes families present with key challenges, and it's like, I don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
And why would you know what to do when it's such a challenging, thing that the family's presenting with? So I think to get expert help and support and resource yourself. If your tank is empty, you're not going to be in a position to be able to support and engage families. So I think they're the key challenges that I have seen, and these are from educators who I think do work effectively. but I think too, this work is not, again, I think it's about, we hear a lot in the news at the moment about the status of educators and the payment and the conditions, We know that educators do complex work, and it's challenging work, and they're multitasking. So there are a lot of demands on educators' time and energy. And I think just to be resource yourself and don't work in isolation would be, I think, a key message that I'd like to give.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for acknowledging that. It is a very isolating job sometimes. And I think, from a coordination unit perspective, that, the relationships that we build with educators is just equally as important. So then, we can support the educator to support the family, and coming back to that shared approach. And a problem shared is a problem halved. And hopefully we can work, collectively and collaboratively with the family, with the educator. And as you articulately said, the educators don't need to have all of the answers all of the time, and that's not the expectation. So I think definitely taking care of their own well-being, we all need to check in and do that. And just really reach out and have that shared approach.
And I think sometimes too, it comes back, Chris, I think, to what I was saying before. Sometimes you don't have to imagine you're the Superman and you're the savior. Sometimes just listening to a family is all they need, that they feel like they can go, and get everything out. And because sometimes, if a mum is struggling in a marriage, or there's domestic violence or whatever, sometimes there's no easy solution. And having someone that they trust, and feel like listens to them and might give them a hug and looks after and treasures their child, that we can't belittle how significant that is in a family's life.
Absolutely. I'd love to bottle that thought. And, families come in many different shapes and sizes, and we really need to look at the different dynamics and respect every family's different, and their needs will be different, as in children as well.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you would love to share with us?
I think that's it, other than to say you're amazing family daycare educators, and you do an amazing, incredibly worthwhile job. So thank you. That's the last thing I would like to say. Thank you.
Lovely. And we would love to thank you, Marianne, for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, the research that you're doing. Could you just please share the name of the book again? And I will actually ask New South Wales Family Daycare Association to share that on the night of the PD in your pocket as well.
Well, that would be wonderful. So it's Professional Communication for Early Childhood Educators.
Lovely.
And it's authored by myself and Jennifer Riborovsky.
Fantastic. I will definitely be making a purchase of that today.
Excellent.
And I encourage all services to, have a look at the research that's out there, and really just remind ourselves of the fantastic work that not only you're doing in the early childhood sector, but also the educators and working and engaging with families.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Marianne. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take care.
Thank
See you.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.